Hello, America. This is Call of Duty Goddess. Today is May 2nd, 2016. I'm in an article here from Freedom Outpost titled Bombshell. Leaked emails reveal Michigan faked lead test results in 2008. Now, it's just blatantly obvious there was a cover-up in Michigan from the local all the way up to the state level over their lead-tainted water. And here is a leaked email. The email was sent in response to a test result that showed one home's lead levels were 10 times the federal action level of 15 parts per billion, and urged the lead test technician to take an additional set of water samples to bump out the high results so that the MDEQ wouldn't be required to notify the community of the high levels of lead in its water. Otherwise, we're back to water quality parameters and lead public notice, complained Adam Rosenthal of the MDEQ's Drinking Water Office in the email. So for years, these people just let Michigan residents continue to drink poisonous lead-tainted water like it was no big deal. 3 MDEQ employees have recently been charged in attempting to cover up Flint's poisonous lead-tainted water, and 2 people have died surrounding the controversy. But the emails just go to show that the level of corruption surrounding the case is by no means restricted to the local level. Now, I'm starting to see a disturbing trend here, and we'll follow that trend and see if you can pick up on the trend that I'm seeing here in Flint, Michigan.
It was October of 2014 that GM recognized that the Flint water was corroding its engines. They got permission from the unelected emergency manager of Flint to disconnect from the Flint River and go back to the Detroit water. It would be another year before the people of Flint were finally allowed to disconnect from the corrosive Flint River as their water supply and hook up again with the Detroit water.
So starting back in '08 with this email, there was definitely, you could see the cover-up going on from '08. Now, it wasn't until this corporation had a problem with the water that there was a problem noticed, and they were allowed to switch back to the water that was decent, but the people were not. So it's corporations above people. That's what happens in a fascist society. So let's keep going.
I represent the first ward, which is the farthest north end of the city of Flint, about 11,000 residents.
So explain how the emergency manager worked and how the decision was made to switch to the Flint River.
If you look at Public Act 436 and even Public Act 4, whenever a city was in so-called quote unquote or quote emergency financial distress or financial trouble unquote, whoever defined that and however the city got there with a general fund budget deficit, the governor would appoint a review team, and the review team might recommend an emergency manager come in. In my opinion, some of that was created because the governor took revenue sharing away from cities and helped create financial distress, about $55 million at some point from the city of Flint.
Wait, you're saying they take the money from Flint and they send it elsewhere in Michigan?
In this case, our money was taken from Flint, Detroit, and other municipalities, and the governor then boasted in some cases a surplus for the state. And so that's why we say in some cases the governor helped create the deficit and then would send in a emergency manager.
So what that man said is extremely incriminating against the governor. He said that he suspects that the governor was actually creating a deficit because he was taking money away from that particular area and putting it into another area. So then an emergency manager can be called in. I smell a setup here. I don't know though. Hey, I'm just making an assumption. Let's continue.
The city of Flint was submitting samples of water where they had been pre-flushing, which you shouldn't pre-flush when you're testing for certain things. Water should set at least for 6 hours and then you test. We found out they were testing maybe certain places that didn't have lead pipes. And so there was some what we call skewed testing samples.
That was Flint City Councilman Eric Mays. He sponsored the legislation to switch Flint back to Detroit water half a year before the governor finally allowed the city to switch back. We wanted to follow up on what Councilman Mays was saying about the lead tests, so we went to speak with Kurt Guyette of the ACLU. He's actually an investigative reporter who's just won Michigan Journalist of the Year. We asked him about the work he did with Professor Mark Edwards, a nationally recognized lead contamination expert at Virginia Tech.
And then as soon as the sample kits started being returned, 12 at a time, we'd box them up and send them back to Virginia Tech. And they're working around the clock to get them analyzed, because as soon as they start seeing the results, they're going, oh no, this is bad, this is bad. And, you know, by the time they got the first 24 bottles, they knew. There were so many with elevated levels that they knew that this was a crisis. And so they created a website, the flintwaterstudy.org website, which is incredible. And they start posting results. And then people with elevated levels of lead in their water, they start calling them up and saying, stop drinking your water.
So notice in the equation, there are no so-called lawmakers or policymakers or leaders, also known as politicians, in this mix to actually fix what is going on. It's mainly volunteers, it's activism, because it's my contention that these politicians, the majority of them, are on the dole of the corporations. Now, let's look at something else here, which I find extremely interesting.
We turn to a little-known story about the bottled water industry in Michigan. In 2001 and 2, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality issued permits to Nestle, now the largest water bottling company in the world, to pump up to 400 gallons of water per minute from aquifers that feed Lake Michigan. This sparked a decade-long legal battle between Nestle and the residents of Mecosta County, where Nestle's water wells are located. One of the most surprising things about this story is that in Mecosta County, Nestle is not really required to pay anything to extract the water besides a small permitting fee to the state and the cost of a lease to a private landowner. In fact, the company received $13 million in tax breaks from the state of Michigan to locate the plant there. The spokesperson for Nestle in Michigan is Deborah Muchmore. She's the wife of Dennis Muchmore. That's Michigan Governor Rick Snyder's chief of staff, who he just retired and registered to be a lobbyist.
So you see that collusion there between big corporations and the politicians, and then of course they have their family working for them on this, that, and the other on the dole as well, and it just goes on down the line. So let's look more into this.
When we first pulled into Flint, Michigan the other night, we came behind, well, right here, the municipal building in Flint. There, the National Guard was giving out water. Today, a sign, Flint Water Distribution Center. They gave us a case of Ice Mountain 100% natural spring water. It's made by Nestle. Now, one of the things that a number of people were talking about is that Nestle, which has a plant a couple hours north of here, a bottling plant, is sucking water out of Lake Michigan for free. So today we're going to head north to Mecosta County to the Nestle bottling plant to speak with a group of women who live in the area, who've been engaging in a legal battle against Nestle for years. We're talking about 200 gallons per minute is being sucked out of the aquifer that feeds Lake Michigan?
Yes, the water from this plant is coming from several wells, one in Mecosta and two in Everett, and they are now pumping 218 gallons per minute. They wanted to do 400.
But you stopped them from a decade-long lawsuit.
That's true.
How much do they pay for the 200 gallons of water per minute that they're sucking out of the aquifer that feeds Lake Michigan?
As far as I know, they're paying nothing.
Let's go talk to Michigan Citizens for Water Conservation.
In 2000, we found that Nestle had come to Mecosta County and was meeting with elected officials. And what Nestle was asking for was a place that they would be able to take water, a bottling plant, and selling the water, which what Nestle did was basically sold the water to us, and it was already our water.
So it's Great Lakes Basin water. It's part of the commons. It belongs to all of us. And part of the reason the people in Mecosta were pretty upset about it is that the extraction of that water was being taken out of the watershed. It was being, the streams were being pumped down to the point where the dead stream looked like a mud hole at one point, and bottled and shipped all over the world.
How is it possible that Nestle, which is making an enormous profit on this water, doesn't actually have to pay for the water it's drawing?
They're drawing the water from a well on private land, for one thing. It would be no different if they came to my house, where I have a well, and asked to use my well to put water in a truck and cart it away. And if I said yes, they have the right to do that.
But this massive public resource, water, we're not talking about feeding a family of 4 or 5. We're talking about 400 gallons per minute around the day, around the month, around the year.
Right. It's criminal.
Why wouldn't there be laws that say when you take this public resource, you have to pay for it, since people are paying for that water, including you if you buy, for example, Ice Mountain?
Well, Amy, I can answer that for you. The politicians, the lawmakers are on the dole of Nestle. That's how they do it. It's a slush fund. Nestle is giving them a constant flow, if you will, of money so Nestle can get the constant flow of water. Plain and simple. The politicians are bought off. The lawmakers are paid for. Now, what I find curious as well is the National Guard was giving out water, Nestle water, to the residents. Come on now. Did the taxpayers' dollars pay for that water from Nestle as well? Look at what's going on here. This is incredible. The corruption, outrageous. Now, let's look at another aspect of this corruption that is very widespread and also frightening, if not more frightening than poisoning people. And it's important to note that the people that you see here, these women, are part of a group that had a lawsuit against Nestle for Nestle taking the water. It cost them $1 million, which they raised on their own, and 8 years. 8 years to go through the suit. And listen to what happened to them and their families.
Terry Swear, can you talk about Nestle actually personally going after you?
My son and I both had some problems. There was a SLAPP suit against my son.
You're talking about a SLAPP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. That's SLAPP.
That is where, to put it very, very simply, it is where the company, Nestle, they wrote the letter to Michigan Citizens for Water Conservation's lawyer, saying that my son, Chris, was not speaking nicely about Nestle, you know, surprise, surprise, and that they were going to do a slap suit.
Did they send private investigators to your home?
We had these private investigators show up. And then we also had the FBI coming to our homes.
Glenna Manicky, did you have any family members or you yourself, were you approached by the FBI?
Well, this is hearsay from my family members, but there had been a small, explosion or bomb or what was it, set off at the wellhead. And they had decided that it was my uncle who had done it. And so the FBI came to his house to arrest him. And they found him in his wheelchair with neither one of his prostheses on.
Now, that's another dangerous, frightening pattern that I've seen. I have studied, if you watch my channel, I have followed what's happening in Oregon, in Nevada a little bit, and out there in the West of how the land grab is going on and the Animas River spill and all of that. I'm seeing the same thing over and over and over again. It's big corporations muscling their way in. It's the FBI. Now, there's one common denominator here when these corporations need some muscle, and that common denominator is InfraGard, which is part of the FBI. InfraGard is the child of the FBI. InfraGard is a way that allows corporations to use everything that the FBI uses at their disposal. That is what InfraGard does. It introduces the muscle, the spying power, the technology into the corporations through our government. It is the total fascist system that is happening. And if our politicians are paid off by the corporations are then joining InfraGard and having all of the technology that the FBI has. What do you think is going to be the end result of this, ladies and gentlemen? Well, I'll let you know because I'm working on that right now. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that we're in big trouble here, folks. And something needs to be done. This is Call of Duty Goddess signing off, and as always, I've got your 6.